Now that we've gotten through a little bit of administrative work, we can start to talk about React. Now, normally in a very large course like this, I would put together a couple intro lectures and tell you about what the React library is and what its purpose is. But let's be honest, that type of lecture at the very start of a course ends up being a little bit dry and boring. Now, these are very important questions to answer, and we're going to talk about what the purpose of React is and what the library is quite a bit over time. But I think that right now, at the start of the course, it would be way more exciting if we put together a tiny little React application instead. And that's what we're going to do. In this video, we're going to put together a tiny React application. Now, we might not understand a lot of the code that we're going to write into this. That's totally fine. I just want to write out a little bit of code and show you how quickly and how easily we could put together something at least somewhat interesting with React. So to put together this React application, we're going to use a little online tool that we're going to use several times throughout this course. I've got a link to the tool that we're going to use here on the screen. You'll notice that the link has a capital T and a capital Q. Make sure you enter these as capital letters as well. So I'm going to copy this link right here. I'm then going to open up a new browser tab and navigate to that link. All right, so this is a tool called CodePen. We can use it to very easily put together tiny little React applications. Like I mentioned, we're going to use it several times throughout this course, but in general, we're going to be working in our local code editor or our local environment. In order to make use of React inside this CodePen instance, we first have to add it as a library. In order to do so, I'm going to find the Settings button on the top right-hand side. I'll click on it. I'll then find the JavaScript button here in the middle. And then you'll notice that we have the ability to add in some external scripts. React is an external script, so we have to add it in as a discrete step right now. So I'm going to search for React. When I search for React, you'll notice that I get two very similarly named libraries appear. So I'm going to add both React and React DOM as libraries. In order to do so, I'll first click on React. I'll then search for React again, and I'll find React DOM, and I'm going to click on that one as well. So now I should see two separate libraries inside of here. Cool, so that's all we have to do. I'll now click on Save and Close. So we can now freely write React code inside of this project. You'll notice that at the very top of the screen, we've got these three separate panels: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. In the JavaScript panel over here, there's already a little bit of code. I put together this function right here. We're going to use this function in just a little bit. So make sure you don't change or delete this thing just yet. Now, in order to make everything on here just a little bit more visible for you, I'm going to change my view or the layout of this page by clicking on Change View up here, and then selecting one of these different editor layouts. So I'm going to use the one on the far left-hand side. All right, so that's a little bit better. Now I can more easily see what's going on. So we're going to write a little bit of React code into these three different panels, and then we'll see our app appear on the right-hand side. Now, of course, I haven't told you about what we're going to build just yet, and I'm not going to. Let's just write out a little bit of code, and I think you'll very quickly see some result appear on the right-hand side that looks pretty darn interesting. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to find the JS panel. I'm then going to go underneath that transform function, and I'm going to add a little bit of code down here. So I'm going to say class app extends react.component. I'll then place a set of curly braces like so and expand them. Then inside of this class body, I'm going to say state equals a JavaScript object. This object is going to have two properties inside of it. I'll have style1, that's going to be an empty object, and style2 will be an empty object as well. And then I'll put a semicolon at the end of the line. After that, I'm then going to go down a couple lines, and I'm going to add in a method to this class. The method is going to be called the render method, and I'll mark it like so. Then inside of here, I'm going to write out the return keyword, and then I'm going to place what looks like HTML. Now remember, we haven't spoken about syntax just yet. We're going to go over all this syntax in great detail in the next couple of videos. For right now, let's just focus on writing out a little bit of code. So I'm going to say return div, and then I'll close the div off like so. So yeah, that definitely looks like HTML. Then inside of this div, I'm going to write one other div with a class name. Notice class name has a capital N for name right there. I'll say equals, double quotes, panel. I'll then say style equals another set of curly braces, and then this.state.style1. And then at the very end of that div, I'll close it off with a / and then a caret like so. I'll then repeat the same exact thing on the line underneath it with one tiny change. When I get to style, I'm going to say this.state.style2. And then I'll close off that div as well. Okay, we're going to add one more method here. Then we're going to add in a little bit of HTML, a little bit of CSS, and we're going to see a real interesting result up here on the right-hand side. So I'm going to add another method right above render. This one is going to be called onMouseMove. I'm going to assign this method by saying equals, and then I'll put in an arrow function, like so. This arrow function is going to be called with a single argument that we'll refer to as event. Then inside the body of this function, I'm going to say this.setState. I'll place my parentheses to call that function. And then I'm going to put a curly brace pair inside there, like so. I'll then expand that, and inside of here, we're going to say style1 is transform minus event.clientX with a capital X divided by event.clientY with a capital Y. I'll then put a comma over here, and I'll say style2, and we're going to put down a very similar line. I'll say transform event.clientX divided by event.clientY. And make sure that you've got capital X and capital Y on both those lines. Okay, now one last thing for the JavaScript side of this project. I'm going to go down to the div right here where we said return div. And I'm going to add in a little additional HTML there. I'm going to say onMouseMove. Make sure you have the same capital letters that I do. And I'll say equals, curly braces, and then inside there I'll put this dot on mouse move. All right, so this is looking pretty good. We've now finished this class. The very last thing I'm going to do is go down to the very bottom of this JS panel outside of the class, and I'm going to write out React DOM.render. I'm going to call that function, and as the first argument, I'm going to say app and make it look like some HTML like so. Then after that, I'll say document.querySelector. I'll put a string in here, and I'll say #root. All right, so that's it for the JavaScript side of things. Now, I know a lot of this syntax looks pretty crazy, but of course, let's just keep carrying on just a little bit, because we're going to see a really cool result up here in just a minute. So now the next thing I'm going to do is go up to the HTML panel up here. I'm going to put in a div with an ID of root, like so, and I'll close it off. And then the very last thing that we'll do is add in a tiny bit of CSS right here. So inside the CSS panel, I'll say div. I want to make sure that every div that gets rendered inside of our application has a height of 100 VH, which essentially means that it's just going to expand to fill the entire panel. I'll then put a semicolon at the end, and I'll also give it a width of 100 VW, which also means it's going to expand to be the full width of this panel as well. Then after that rule, I'm going to add in a class selector of panel, so .panel like so. I'm going to give this a position of absolute, a box dash shadow of 0, 0, 50 pix gray. And then the very last step here, notice we get a kind of interesting thing over there up here, but one last thing we're going to do, I'm going to find the Assets button on the bottom left-hand side over here. So here's the Assets button. I'm going to click on it, and you'll notice this window appear. I'm going to find the Patterns button right there, and then I'm going to click on one of these patterns. You can click on any pattern you want, but I'm going to pick a kind of interesting pattern right here, this kind of wavy-looking one. And then I'll go back over to my CSS box over here, and I'm going to hit Paste by hitting Command-V, or Control-V if you're on Windows. So I'll paste that in. And you should see a whole bunch of stuff appear like so. Okay, so that's pretty much it. We've now got our app put together. So I'm going to close that box. And now I want you to move your mouse around the screen a little bit. And you're going to see this really interesting design up here. So that's it. That's the React app. You can maybe tell why I didn't want to tell you what we were building right away, because it probably would have not made a lot of sense if I gave you a verbal description. So what's the goal of this app? Well, no goal whatsoever. It's just a pretty little visualization that I wanted to put together to show you how interesting a tiny little thing we could put together with just a tiny bit of React code, just a couple lines. And we got to a very interesting result that looks like this right here. All right, so obviously this does not really tell us a lot about what React is or what we use it for, and it also doesn't really tell us about all this crazy syntax we put in here. So let's take a quick pause right here. We're going to come back to the next section, and we're going to start talking about what we just did and really start to dive into the React library. So quick pause, and I'll see you in just a minute.